The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi approached the podium, camera flashes illuminating her confident stride. She adjusted the microphone, her crisp blue blazer standing out sharply against the wood-paneled walls of the historic chamber. Across the room, Supreme Court Justice Coney Barrett sat composed, her expression masked by a practiced judicial calm. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today," Bondi began, her voice steady and clear. "I come before this committee with evidence that could change everything we thought we knew about Justice Barrett's appointment process." The room fell silent. Bondi reached into her briefcase and pulled out a sealed folder, boldly stamped, "Confidential," in red letters. "What I am about to reveal," she continued, "details a secret arrangement made before Justice Barrett's confirmation, one that was never disclosed to this committee or the American people." For the first time, Justice Barrett's calm facade cracked slightly. Her eyes widened as Bondi opened the folder. Committee members leaned forward in their chairs, shock spreading across faces on both sides of the aisle. The chairman scrambled for his gavel, but it was too late. The revelation had begun, setting in motion events that would change the Supreme Court forever. Before we dive deeper into this stunning confrontation, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explosive political revelations the mainstream media won't show you. Pam Bondi hadn't intended to be at the center of this political firestorm. A former prosecutor known for her toughness and conservative principles, she served as Florida's first female attorney general from 2011 to 2019 before moving into private practice, all while remaining closely connected to influential conservative circles. Known for her blunt approach and commitment to transparency, Bondi received an anonymous envelope 3 weeks earlier. Delivered without a return address, it contained documents hinting at an undisclosed arrangement surrounding Justice Barrett's 2020 confirmation. Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court's youngest justice, had built a formidable legal career as a Notre Dame law professor and a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit. She was confirmed to the Supreme Court in October 2020, following the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Barrett's strict constructionist views and devout religious beliefs had made her both a conservative icon and a lightning rod for progressive criticism. The Judiciary Oversight hearing had originally been scheduled as a routine review of recent Supreme Court decisions. Justice Barrett had appeared voluntarily, part of the court's effort to maintain cordial relations with Congress. No one had expected fireworks until Bondi took the stand. Bondi had spent days verifying the documents, consulting legal experts and former government ethics officials. "This isn't about politics," she told her inner circle. "If what I have is authentic, the American people deserve to know before any more landmark decisions are made." The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Bondi's allegations proved true, they could trigger calls for Justice Barrett's recusal or even impeachment. If proven false, Bondi's credibility would be shattered, and she could face serious legal consequences for defamation. The tension in the hearing room was palpable. Democratic senators whispered urgently to aides, while Republicans maintained poker faces torn between defending Barrett and protecting their own political futures. Justice Barrett herself remained composed, though some observers noticed her right hand gripping the edge of the table with unusual force. For the millions watching the live stream, this was not mere political theater. This was a moment that could fundamentally alter the future of the highest court in the land, at a time when several major constitutional cases were pending. "The documents I've obtained," Bondi said, her voice echoing through the hushed chamber, "suggest that prior to her confirmation hearings, Justice Barrett entered into a private understanding regarding her stance on certain categories of cases." Senator Richard Blumenthal interrupted sharply. "Ms. Bondi, these are extremely serious allegations. Can you be specific about the nature of this alleged arrangement?" Bondi nodded, lifting the first document from her folder. "This," she said, placing it on the overhead projector, "is an email exchange between two senior officials from the previous administration, dated September 18, 2020, 3 days before Justice Barrett's nomination was announced." The document's text appeared on screens throughout the room. It detailed a mutual understanding involving ACB, An explosive revelation that left the entire chamber stunned. The documents hinted at how certain cases might be handled. Though carefully worded to avoid explicit detail, the language strongly implied that assurances had been sought regarding specific legal positions Barrett would adopt once confirmed. Justice Barrett leaned toward her microphone. These emails, if authentic, do not include me as a recipient, Ms. Bondi. I never participated in such discussions. Bondi gave a respectful nod. That's correct, Justice Barrett. You are not directly copied on the emails. However, the next document addresses that issue. She placed a second page onto the overhead projector, a calendar entry showing a private meeting between Barrett and the officials mentioned in the emails, scheduled for the day after the exchange. The committee chairman quickly intervened. Ms. Bondi suggesting impropriety based solely on a calendar entry is speculative at best. Supreme Court nominees routinely meet with administration officials during the confirmation process. I understand your skepticism, Mr. Chairman, Bondi replied calmly, which is why the third document is the most critical. She paused, locking eyes with Justice Barrett before continuing. This is a memorandum summarizing that meeting, written by one of the participants and circulated among 3 senior administration officials. As the memo appeared on the screen, audible gasps rippled through the chamber. The memorandum outlined specific legal questions expected to come before the court in the next term and detailed Barrett's general perspectives on each. More troublingly, it referenced mutual commitments intended to ensure alignment on several controversial areas of law. Senator Josh Hawley, visibly unsettled, turned toward Barrett. Justice Barrett, I need to ask you directly. Did this meeting occur as described in the memorandum? Barrett's response was measured but tense. Senator, I took dozens of meetings during the nomination process. I cannot recall the specific content of each. However, I can state unequivocally that I never made commitments about how I would rule on future cases. That would violate judicial ethics. Bondi pressed on. Justice Barrett, please refer to page V3 of the memorandum. It specifically mentions your expressed concerns about how such discussions might appear if they became public. The room grew even more silent as Barrett scanned the document. It claimed that she had requested absolute confidentiality regarding certain aspects of the meeting, specifically because the discussions went beyond the traditional scope of nomination interviews. Senator Ted Cruz attempted to shift the narrative. This entire presentation, he argued, relies on unauthenticated documents from anonymous sources. In what world is this appropriate material for a congressional hearing? But Bondi was ready. Senator Cruz, I understand your concern. That's why I had these documents independently examined. She produced affidavits from 2 digital forensic experts who had verified the document's metadata and authentication markers. Furthermore, Bondi continued, producing yet another document. I have a sworn statement from an individual who was present at the meeting, someone who only recently came forward due to concerns over Supreme Court decisions that appear to align precisely with the commitments outlined here. The room's tension hit a boiling point as Bondi revealed the witness, a former mid-level Justice Department official who had taken notes during the meeting and only later realized the full ethical implications of what had transpired. Despite maintaining remarkable composure, Justice Barrett requested a brief recess to review the materials with her counsel. Seeing the strain behind Barrett's professional facade, the chairman swiftly granted her request. As Barrett and her legal team exited to a private room, cameras captured the grim, unsettled expressions of the committee members. No one had anticipated that a routine oversight hearing would veer into revelations threatening the very legitimacy of the Supreme Court. During the recess, the hearing room erupted into frantic discussion. Democratic senators huddled with staffers speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Across the aisle, Republicans appeared divided, some strategizing defenses for Barrett, others subtly distancing themselves from the unfolding crisis. Constitutional scholars flooded social media with rapid analyses, speculating about the potential ramifications. When Barrett returned 15 minutes later, the atmosphere had palpably shifted. Her usual composure was replaced by a visible tension. As she took her seat, Her legal counsel handed her a hastily written note. Before questioning resumed, Justice Barrett requested to address the committee. The chairman nodded, and all eyes turned toward her. "I have reviewed Ms. Bondi's documents," Barrett began, her voice steady despite the charged air. "I take these allegations extremely seriously, as they strike at the heart of judicial independence and the oath I swore to uphold." She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "The memorandum Ms. Bondi presented contains discussions I do not recognize or recall. However, rather than issue a blanket denial, I believe the integrity of the court demands a thorough investigation into these claims." The room froze in stunned silence. Many had expected Barrett to deny the allegations categorically, not to call for an investigation. Sensing her opportunity, Bondi moved in for the critical moment. "Justice Barrett, I appreciate your willingness to consider these documents. However, there is one final piece of evidence that I believe will clarify matters." From her folder, Bondi withdrew a final document, a piece she had deliberately reserved for this juncture. "This is a handwritten note, allegedly written by you during the meeting in question." She placed it on the projector. Barrett's distinctive handwriting filled the screen, unmistakable. The note contained abbreviated references to several legal doctrines with asterisks next to specific entries and a prominent phrase, "Maintain conf on points 1 to 3. Barrett leaned forward, studying the projection. Her expression shifted slightly as she recognized her own handwriting. The room held its collective breath. What happened next stunned everyone. "The handwriting appears to be mine," Barrett acknowledged carefully. "But this note is presented without context. May I approach to examine the original?" After receiving permission, Barrett rose and crossed the room. Under the lights, she scrutinized the paper, then motioned for her counsel to join her. They whispered urgently. Moments later, Barrett returned to her seat, a new certainty hardening her features. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ms. Bondi," she began, her voice now stronger. "I recognize this document, but not in the context implied." She opened her portfolio and produced several pages of her own notes. "This appears to be a page from my personal preparation materials prior to my confirmation hearings. I kept extensive notes, as any nominee would." She passed the documents to the committee clerk. "You will see the same abbreviations and markings throughout. The phrase 'maintain' conf refers to confidentiality, not to confirmation pledges as has been suggested. Specifically, it pertains to confidential client matters from my prior legal work, matters I was ethically barred from discussing publicly under attorney-client privilege." Barrett then turned to the contested memorandum. "As for the meeting summary Ms. Bondi presented, I cannot explain its origins, but I can state unequivocally it mischaracterizes any conversation I had during the nomination process. I would never make commitments about future cases. Doing so would violate the judicial oath I have honored throughout my career." The momentum in the room shifted instantly. Bondi, who had commanded the narrative only minutes earlier, now found herself struggling to maintain control as skepticism visibly grew among the committee members. "Justice Barrett, these explanations seem convenient," Bondi countered, pressing forward. "The whistleblower's testimony—" Barrett cut her off, an unusual move for her. "Ms. Bondi, you mentioned a whistleblower who took notes during the alleged meeting. May I ask, have those original notes been produced?" Bondi hesitated. The whistleblower provided their recollection, which formed the basis of the memorandum. Barrett nodded slowly. "So there are no contemporaneous notes, only a memorandum created recently from 2-year-old memories?" "The memorandum," Bondi insisted, "was prepared by administration officials immediately after the meeting." Barrett's voice sharpened. "Then why does its metadata, verified by your own experts, show it was created last month?" A ripple of murmurs ran through the hearing room. Bondi visibly faltered, caught off guard by the revelation. She clearly hadn't expected Barrett to attack the document's technical underpinnings. Sensing an opening, Senator Ted Cruz pounced. "Ms. Bondi, are you suggesting that a document created last month accurately reflects a meeting from 2020 without contemporaneous notes or recordings?" Before Bondi could formulate a response, Barrett delivered the final blow. "Mr. Chairman," she said, turning to face the committee, "during the recess, my staff made inquiries regarding the date cited in these documents. I was not in Washington, D.C. on that day. I was delivering a lecture at Notre Dame Law School, recorded and attended by hundreds." She produced travel records and the official lecture schedule as proof. "Furthermore," she continued, "the two officials I supposedly met with were not in Washington either. One was in Florida, the other in Texas, according to their publicly available schedules." Silence engulfed the room. The implications were devastating. Despite their polished appearance, the documents contained a glaring factual error that destroyed their credibility. Bondi stood frozen at the podium, struggling to process what had just unfolded. Before a national audience, her carefully orchestrated case was unraveling in real time. Breaking the silence, Barrett spoke again, not with triumph, but with somber resolve. "I understand the court's decisions provoke passionate disagreement, but allegations of secret deals and ethical breaches demand extraordinary evidence grounded in fact and context." Recognizing the tide had turned, the committee chairman leaned in. "Ms. Bondi, do you have a response to Justice Barrett's points regarding the document creation date and the impossibility of the alleged meeting?" Visibly shaken, Bondi managed a reply. "I received these documents in good faith and had them verified for authenticity. If there are discrepancies in the timeline, they must be investigated. I continue to stand by my broader concern about judicial independence, but Justice Barrett has raised legitimate questions about this specific evidence." It was the closest thing to a concession she would offer. The triumph was clear, not through anger or theatrics, but through Barrett's methodical dismantling of the allegations with verifiable facts and airtight reasoning. The hearing adjourned an hour later, but the fallout had only just begun. As Justice Barrett exited the committee room, flanked by Capitol Police providing extra security, the hallways buzzed with stunned congressional staffers and reporters trying to make sense of the spectacle they had just witnessed. Within minutes, Barrett's documents and Bondi's allegations dominated national headlines. News networks broke into scheduled programming to cover the dramatic confrontation, legal experts debating its significance. Conservative outlets framed it as a failed character assassination attempt. "Documents debunked, Justice Barrett exposes false allegations," blared one headline, accompanied by footage of Barrett calmly dismantling Bondi's claims. Progressive outlets struck a more cautious tone. "Barrett refutes controversial documents. Questions remain about court independence," capturing the nuance that while Bondi's evidence had collapsed, broader concerns lingered. Meanwhile, speculation swirled around the anonymous whistleblower. Some suggested a disgruntled former employee was seeking revenge. Others wondered if the entire episode had been an elaborate setup, meant to discredit efforts at judicial oversight. By nightfall, 3 major developments had occurred. First, the Senate Judiciary Committee's chairman and ranking member released a rare bipartisan statement. They were launching a formal investigation into the origins of the documents presented at the hearing. "We may disagree on judicial philosophy, but we are united in condemning the use of apparently falsified documents in congressional proceedings," the statement read. Second, forensic analysts from the FBI were reportedly examining the documents to trace their origins, focusing on when and how they were created and whether they were recent modifications of authentic templates. Third, several legal ethics experts released a joint analysis of the ordeal, noting that regardless of the veracity of this specific allegation, the episode highlighted broader concerns about Supreme Court confirmation processes and the absence of binding ethics rules for the highest court in the land. Justice Barrett, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal, issued a brief statement through the Supreme Court's Public Information Office. "I appreciate the committee's willingness to hear all perspectives. The work of the court continues, guided by the Constitution and the rule of law." Facing significant backlash and potential professional repercussions, Pam Bondi appeared on a friendly cable news program that evening to defend her actions. "I presented evidence that was provided to me by what I believe to be a credible source," she explained. "If some of that evidence has been called into question, that doesn't erase the broader concerns about judicial independence that many Americans share." The host pressed, "But do you regret not verifying the basic timeline before making such serious allegations against a Supreme Court justice?" Bondi hesitated before responding. "I believe I did my due diligence with the information available to me. If I made a mistake in that process, I'll accept responsibility, but I won't apologize for asking difficult questions about our institutions." The political fallout extended far beyond Bondi and Barrett. Several senators who had eagerly amplified Bondi's allegations, now refuted, found their own credibility in question. Meanwhile, those who had defended Barrett from the start claimed vindication. Constitutional scholars noted that regardless of this incident's outcome, it underscored the fragile state of public trust in American institutions. A prominent law professor observed, "When allegations this explosive seem plausible to millions of Americans, regardless of their ultimate truth, it signals a crisis of confidence in the Supreme Court that should concern everyone." A week after the hearing, investigative journalists uncovered significant discrepancies in the whistleblower's background, raising serious doubts about their credibility and motives. The individual had apparently never worked in the positions they had claimed, though they had managed to gather enough insider information to craft convincing documents. However, the most lasting consequence came through an unexpected channel. 2 weeks after the hearing, the Supreme Court announced new transparency measures regarding justice meetings during the confirmation process. While not directly acknowledging the Bondi incident, the new procedures required documentation of substantive, pre-confirmation meetings and clearer disclosures of potential conflicts of interest. In a rare interview, a senior Supreme Court justice not involved in the controversy admitted, while the specific allegations proved unfounded, they highlighted legitimate concerns about the court's transparency. Sometimes it takes a crisis, even one based on false premises, to drive necessary institutional change. For the American public, the dramatic confrontation between Bondi and Barrett became yet another example of how difficult it had become to separate fact from fiction in the political arena. Paradoxically, the incident underscored the enduring power of evidence, context, and methodical verification in an era of instant allegations and viral outrage. 6 months later, when Justice Barrett wrote the majority opinion in a landmark case that contradicted the claims of the falsified documents, many saw it as the final vindication of her judicial independence, but others wondered whether the intense public scrutiny had influenced her decision-making in ways no one could measure. The lesson was clear. In America's charged political environment, accusations could spread globally before the truth had time to put on its shoes. Yet facts presented clearly and methodically still had the power to prevail.